Hello, and welcome to another episode of Breaking the Guard. On today's episode, I'm going to address a user question based on some feedback I was giving in one of my posts, which was about steroids and PEDs. And I think the particular question was addressing one, my stance on them, which I think is pretty well known now, but I'll add a second question too. What would I think of having a league that was completely clean and then the alternative, a league that was a PED league? Because there are games now that are called enhanced games, which I guess are different, like sprinting, long distance running, different like type of Olympic sports that now they're specifically requesting people be quote unquote enhanced, taking, doing blood doping and steroids and whatever else to get the most performance. So that's an interesting twist to that argument. Let's start with the first, though, which is my stance on PEDs. I dislike them. I wish they didn't exist. I wish no one was using them. I think, especially in combat sports, it's incredibly reckless and dangerous. Not in so much as for the user. Obviously we have seen people who have been able to use PEDs in some form for a long time. I think, top of my head, Arnold Schwarzenegger, he's lived well past his life expectancy. So I think he's proved it is possible to go longer in life and still be able to use a combination of these PEDs. I don't know specifically what he was doing, but he clearly was successful. So, I guess good job. I don't know. But I think when we're talking about there's a few things. One, rule set, right? If the rules say you can't do it, you can't do it. That's just it. And in combat sports, at least in mixed martial arts in the United States, it says you're not supposed to be doing it. And people are doing it, right? You could see the physiques in some of the fighters, and you're like, man, it makes you scratch your head, right? Like, how is this guy passing a test? But they always have a way around testing, right? Because somebody has to design the test, and then someone can, work around that to beat those tests. And it doesn't take much from an eyeball test to understand like who's doing what, right? I think the most obvious juicer in history was probably Vitor Belfort, right? And you could see when he makes his UFC debut at 18, his traps begin at his ears. The guy's neck started like this, and that's a very obvious telltale sign of overdevelopment of the traps. Again, normally these muscles don't grow to that extent before all your other muscles does. And his traps are just, so you could usually see that in people. The other one is like the roid gut, right? Which is more actually the HGH gut. People take human growth hormone, all of your organs grow. So then you end up getting this, what appears to be a belly, but it's not actually like fat. What it is that your intestines have also grown besides the muscles. And that also means your heart has grown and all your organs have grown. So not great, right? You could also see guys who have what they call cranial bossing, where the brow starts to extend a bit more. You start looking more Cro-Magnon, another sign of somebody doing HGH. And it doesn't take many looks to see that in a lot of the top athletes in grappling and in mixed martial arts. So steroids and PEDs of all forms are very prevalent, and we're not talking about even people just doing stuff like blood doping to improve their stamina or whatnot. So there's a lot of it going around, right? And on one hand, like stuff like HGH, from my understanding of it, again, I'm not a doctor or a specialist, but from what I've read and what I've seen, it definitely has a lot of long-term health consequences. Anybody who has an enlarged heart is at a higher risk of having a cardiac event. So not great. Having your stomach pushed out because your intestines are growing, obviously not great. And there's people who have been using steroids for so long and they probably didn't cycle like you're supposed to. So they end up losing all endogenous testosterone production. They can't produce testosterone anymore. Their testicles are basically non-functional. And now, in order to maintain any level of testosterone, they have to be injecting themselves for the rest of their lives. And I know a few people like that. So obviously not great. We have athletic commissions in this sport for mixed martial arts. And the entire reason for this, from my understanding, is fighter safety. So if we're making it easy for people to pass these tests and not doing a lot of protocol to make sure that we're protecting them from themselves, so to speak, you are failing them just like you are with the weight cuts. There's a bigger problem, though, than just from the fighter's own health, right? Because one might say, well, maybe I am willing to take the risk. Maybe, I will say that I'm ready to die at 40 years old if that means I could be a champion in my 30s, right? And there's a lot of people that would say that, right? Or would like to say that at least, but once you're 40, you're probably like, oh, no, I want to live longer. But nevertheless, let's say there is people who have come to peace with that. There is then the problem that your opponent didn't agree to fight somebody who was cheating. Right? My case, I've been clean my whole life. Never smoked a joint, never done any recreational drugs, never done any performance-enhancing drugs. I could probably count how many times I've taken Advil or Tylenol in my life in two hands, right? So I've always liked just to rest my way out of things, and the only injectable thing I've done is stem cells. And I think I've done that 4 times. And that's over a period of 7 years. And that's probably the only reason I would do it. There's no consequences. It's very healing. It's helped me a lot tremendously. And I'm not competing, but even if I was, it's totally within every rule set. So I'm not cheating, right? And it doesn't make me better than anyone else, doesn't make me stronger. It's simply for recovery, to heal. So I think that's, for me, ethically, I feel great doing that, right? I didn't give myself a special edge over anybody else that anybody can do with no risk. So full disclosure on what I've done. But if I'm fighting somebody that I know is juicing to the gills, right? Let's say like a Paul Harris, for example. And that's getting very specific. But I am now going into this fight at a disadvantage because I know this guy, as a result, he's able to train more than I can because we can recover faster from using steroids. He's going to get stronger and bigger. And the bigger problem with that, besides the fact that it's against the rules, he's cheating, is that in a combat sport, that additional advantage that he's getting from strength and muscle and stamina potentially, is that he's going to be able to do more harm to me than if he wasn't. We can easily see this if we look at a Vitor Belfort side by side. When you see Vitor before USADA, he's a physical specimen, just shredded, traps to the ears, ginormous, right? And obviously he knocked out a bunch of people. When we look at Vitor after USADA, his hips are wider than his shoulders. He looks like a hot mess. And behold, he doesn't fight nearly as well as he used to, right? So it's clear that the PEDs offered him a great advantage to do violence. And in a sport where we're trying to hurt people, magnifying somebody's abilities beyond what they can naturally do, or what they can do at least by the rules, is one of the most horrendous forms of cheating that you can do. It's the equivalent, from my view, of putting like lead shot in your gloves. You could kill someone by cheating that way. And then you'd be like, oh, I was just trying to win. Like, yeah, you won by killing your opponent or hurting your opponent in a way that was terrible. I know Michael Bisping had not so nice words for Vitor after he got inducted into the Hall of Fame, because I think he credited Vitor for being the guy that blinded him in the eye. They ended up losing that eyeball. And this was before USADA, I'm guessing, so he juiced his way to take Bisping's eye. I would be furious as well. So when we consider PED use, it's not just that you're cheating, it's not that you're just putting yourself at a greater health risk, you're also putting your opponents at a greater health risk, to the point where you could do serious harm by maiming them, or even, God forbid, killing somebody through your cheating. Those 4 reasons in itself should make it very clear that PEDs doesn't belong in combat sports, right? The other thing that I don't like about it is that now, let's say I was on board, like, okay, everybody can do what they want, free country, we can juice to our heart's consent, great. But now it becomes a pharmaceutical battle and financial battle as well. Because if you guys listened to me the last time when I was talking about gyms, I could become a world champion training at a small gym from the middle of nowhere. I don't need a lot of resources. I just need good formulas, a good coach to guide me, and I can get there, right? That's still available today, and I made the case it's probably more suitable in many situations than joining a gym with 1,000 fighters in it, right? However, if I have to compete with people who have greater resources or go bigger gyms, and their team of cheaters, people who are giving you injection cycles and like, oh, okay, which drugs to take, which to cycle on, which to cycle off, you're not going to do that from a middle of nowhere gym, right? You won't be able to compete. So, and plus by them doing all this stuff, they're also getting more mat time because they're recovering faster, which is probably one of the bigger benefits that people overlook. They always think about the strength advantage. And that, to me, is only a piece of the puzzle. The bigger piece is more mat time, especially for athletes who are older, like you're going in your 30s. You have to reduce your training times because you just can't recover as fast. But if you're taking that stuff, you can train as much as you want. Well, not as much as you want, but you can train more, let's say, right? So you're getting an unfair advantage in that way as well. But if I'm coming from a small gym, I'm not going to be able to pay for the type of cycles that a bigger gym can do. And I might not have the financial resources or the connections to be able to do so. So now I'm going to be gatekeeped by PEDs. And I think that's terrible, especially in a sport that is traditionally a poverty sport. Boxing, wrestling, you don't need gear. In boxing, a pair of gloves and a mouthpiece, you're good to go. Headgear, for wrestling headgear, shoes and a singlet, you're good to go. Jiu-jitsu, gi, if you're doing the gi, or no gi like I was, you really didn't need anything. So to add, now we have to spend a few $1,000s every time we're going to fight and that's on the low end for having our PED schedule. That's going to take out a lot of potential athletes. And I think that's unfortunate, right? Like, why are we adding this, right? Let's just keep everything on a level playing field, work with what God gave you, whatever body you have and whatever you're able to build up naturally, use that, right? I feel that is the most honest way of doing this. I think it's disingenuous when you are using steroids and drugs to enhance your performance and then say, oh, look, I'm the greatest athlete. It's like, well, you perhaps have the mind of the greatest athlete, but you kind of cheated your way into the body, right? It's kind of like the way I see uh, a Kardashian, let's say, right? A woman that is really caked up with makeup and tons of plastic surgery. It's like if I was going to have children with her, I don't know what the kids are going to look like because this person has so changed fundamentally on a physical level who they are. You know, I don't know what I'm getting, right? Like they might have had a huge nose, maybe they had a tiny nose, you know, they could have had a big butt, now they have a small butt, you know, they had no breasts, now they have huge, like I'm getting something very different than what actually was there. And I feel that people who are doing PEDs are kind of doing the same because part of sports is to try to figure out what are the best body types and physiques and genetics. And of course, genetics is a big part of sport. But once you start, you know, modifying yourself in these ways, we're kind of blurring the lines here because I don't know what genetics you had because you've added so much, you know, testosterone and growth hormone and all this other stuff that you're like a different creature almost, right? And so I don't like that part of it either. And like I said, but the bigger issue for me more is just like we're adding a gatekeeper now in that you need to have the right doctors or pharmacists to be able to prescribe you the right types of cycles and the schedules so you don't get caught, right? And then I'm sure they're doing some cheating as far as like how they're beating piss tests and all that or blood tests. So on a small level, like if you're coming from a small gym, you're not going to be able to compete with that, right? You just won't have the resources to do that. And I think that's unfortunate, right? I prefer that everything was natural. Everything's on a level playing field. There's no resource that you need other than your brains and, you know, your body. I feel that is the ideal there. And when we're doing combat sports, we're not coming in with like special gear, like, you know, basketball, like the type of shoes you're wearing is an effect. If you're a skier, obviously the type of skis you have, you know, like other sports equipment is part of the strategy, like biking or whatnot. But like the beauty of combat sports is just your body and your brain. But when we start making drugs a big part of it, now we have to factor, okay, well, what's the stack that this person's taking? Because that's a component that is coming into him. That is his equipment, his gear, if you will, right? I don't like it. So I think I've outlined my case pretty well there as why the myriad of reasons was I don't like PEDs. And even as someone who's not a competitor, I've never taken them. I will never plan on taking them. I don't think it's good for long-term health. I could be wrong, right? Like I said, I look at people like maybe like Joe Rogan, who's taking a bunch of stuff, and we'll see how he does in his later years. You know, if he makes it to like 80 and he's still like a bull, I'm like, oh, okay, maybe I was wrong about that. Maybe you could get away with this. But personally, I think there's a price to be paid when you start doing these modifications. And a lot of people, I think, believe they're smarter than nature. And I think that's hubris, right? Like you're playing with forces you don't fully understand. And I always feel there's a price to be paid there. So I'd rather just, you know, Game of Thrones, pay the iron price, the hard price, and just do it the right way. But so that's that part of the argument. Now let's go into, would I like having a natural only league and then a PED league or an quote unquote enhanced league? I could see value in that, right? And that was basically what Pride was, right? Like Pride Fighting Championships, you know, in the early 2000 era was an enhanced league. It specifically stated in their contracts, no testing is done on our athletes, right? And that was like in bold letters, if I remember correctly. I forgot who shared their contract. It might have been Rampage. That's a name that pops into my head. But someone posted a picture of the contract and it had explicitly stated that, which in my mind is saying, please enhance yourself as much as physically possible. So we got to see a lot of crazy characters out of Pride FC. I mean, you see Vanderlei Silva fighting there, and he's a freaking demon. And, you know, he had some great fights in there. And Overeem actually looked like he wasn't on anything when he started, but by the end of his K1 tenure, before he went to the UFC, he was clearly on everything humanly possible. And he looked like a totally different person. If you looked at Alistair Overeem when he, excuse me, when he first entered Pride FC, he was a Dutch kickboxer, very tall, very long. He was good shape and obviously very effective. He was a great kickboxer. And he had a good guillotine choke as well. But he looked nothing like he does, or like he did at the end of his K1 tenure. And once he started fighting the UFC, which he became just this enormous caricature of a man. Like he's just like, lats just extended, the shoulders, the traps, everything. So it was very obvious he was taking all sorts of gear. And back then we had what was called their TRT exemption. Like, because, your testosterone levels are low. So like he needs to boost them, which was a bunch of crap. Like anybody who believed that was full of, again, I'm not a doctor or biologist, but from my understanding, for men, there is no baseline testosterone level, right? I could be wrong about this, but this is what I've heard and read, and it makes sense to me. Every man's testosterone level is different. So I think they say from 4 to 800 is supposed to be normal. But that's across the whole human spectrum. But normal for me might be 400. Normal for you might be 800, right? So it's hard to judge what's your normal? And that's why I felt like if you were going to do this type of thing, you would have to get a baseline earlier in life. Like maybe a baseline when your peak teenage years, like maybe when you're 17 or whatnot, whatever your puberty is going through the roof, to see, okay, what's the high level? And then in your mid 20s, what's your testosterone? Then in your 30s, so you could see, okay, well, where the testosterone level was when you were a fully grown adult. And then if that starts to dip below that, you can understand, okay, then I should maybe I can make a case for supplementation there. Personally, I would say just live a healthy lifestyle and you shouldn't have an issue. But in any case, my point being was that the old Pride FC was basically an enhanced league. All the guys there were basically on gear. Old school UFC, there was obviously a lot of guys in gear also. Vitor being one of the prime examples of it. I don't know if everyone was on it, but probably a good amount of people were, and they weren't really testing. When USADA stepped into the picture, it definitely shook things up. We saw Vitor Belfort completely fall off. We saw Alistair Overeem change significantly. And there's a few other notables there. Johnny Hendricks was another guy that just disappeared after being the champion. So it clearly had an effect, but it didn't remove everything. And just like with any cheating protocol, the cheaters learn how to cheat the system, and then the system has to recover and figure out new ways of catching the cheaters. So it's just like with software and hackers, they're always finding new ways to exploit bugs in the program in their favor. So it has to constantly be renovating. When the system is not renovating, then you're just letting the hackers run amok. And I think we might have a little bit of that going on right now, at least in my opinion. But if we're just working on the hypothetical here, we have a clean league and then an enhanced league. I think that it would be great. I would probably watch both, although I would care more about the clean league, because to me that's going to be the true measure of skill, because we're not measuring anything else, right? It's not like, well, what cycle did they take, and what order did they do these things, whatever it is that they do, right? versus it's just okay. Let's measure this guy's physical abilities, his technical abilities, and his will, the pure essence of combat. Right? Those are the things I want to see. When we're doing enhanced things, well, we have to weigh in all these other drugs that he's taking in. So it's not one athlete versus another athlete. It's one athlete and their stack versus another athlete and their stack, and let's see who comes out better. I'm not as interested in that. As I said, I'm not a drug user, never will be. So I don't care about that. I don't want to measure that. Right? I want to measure what I know, which is will, technique, and physicality. So I think the pure league is always going to have more preference. And outside of the hypothetical, the cheaters are going to know that, and they're going to want to fight in the pure league, right? Not a great metaphor for this, but similar. With the UFC, we have Bellator, we have PFL, we have ONE FC. There's all sorts of leagues, and people can make good livings off fighting off those other leagues outside the UFC. But at some point of every other athlete's career that is not in the UFC, they want to get into the UFC. Why? Because it's the biggest name in the sport. It's the one that holds the most sway. Saying I'm a PFL champion is great, but it doesn't mean anything to anybody who doesn't follow the PFL, which unfortunately is most people. Being a UFC champion, you're a celebrity. Everyone around the world knows who you are, and you command that glory, that honor. So at some point, you're going to want to fight in the UFC, right? And I don't blame them, because once you've made enough money, now it's about fame and glory that you're after. So the UFC is the next step. I think that a clean league is going to essentially be the same thing. It's going to be, the enhanced league is going to be the freak show. It's going to be, oh man, we're going to see some juiced up guys and crazy matches, and that's interesting. But I think people do enjoy purity, right? Even if we talk about women, men always want the woman who's more chaste and virgin, right? You're not going after the village bicycle, so to speak. And I think when you talk about your body, it's similar. If somebody is the world champion, but he's taken every drug possible, he's done this, and that, you're like, okay, there's an asterisk, right? There's a little asterisk by that name. So I think the pure league doesn't exist in reality because everybody's going to be trying to cheat it, and we basically have to keep trying to filter to remove people who are cheating. It's unfortunate that there's not enough people in combat that have honor, but every sport is like that, especially once there's money and there's fame involved. People are going to want an easy way in, and they feel like, well, if I can cheat my way to the top, so be it, right? Nobody's going to care once I've already have all the titles and I've made all the money that I'm a cheater, right? Again, a case may be made for John Jones, right? He's cheated a bunch of times. He's done a lot of bad things, and he's still one of the greatest of all time. And I begrudgingly have to say, technically and by will, he is. Like, when he's fighting, man, he's a force to be reckoned with. But he is a cheater. There is an asterisk to his name, right? It's not clean. It's definitely not clean. And his recent shenanigans have definitely muddied the waters a bit of his legacy, in my opinion. But he still did everything that he wanted to do. And I think that's a problem with allowing cheaters to, like, little slaps on the wrist. I believe in harsh penalties. I'm a bit biblical in that sense. I think if you steal, you lose a hand. You steal again, you lose both hands. Stealing's going to be difficult now. Right? I feel, it's harsh, but you know what? Nobody else is going to make the same mistake. And if they do, they're kind of silly, right? Like, if you know you can lose your hand for stealing a candy bar, are you really going to steal a candy bar? Probably not, right? If you're going to steal, it's probably going to be something really big that it was worth the risk of losing your hand. At least that's what a logical person will do, right? So I believe in harsh penalties. And I think people who caught, cheating, whether it's blood doping or, steroids, anything that's against the rules, boom, 5-year suspension. You ruin someone's career that way, which is kind of the point, right? We don't want people trying to see if they can get by. A year suspension sounds like a lot, but it really isn't, because fighters sometimes fight for especially in a higher level, they're fighting 1 to 2 times a year. So it's not great for them, but a year is not a big layoff. 2, 3, 4 years, now that's significant. You're getting ring rust for sure after a couple of years of not fighting. And you're losing relevancy, you're losing youth. It's a big problem. 5 years would be the harshest I would think. 5 years is significant. You could, like I said, you could end someone's career right there, potentially. So maybe a little too harsh, but you get what I'm saying. Like it's gotta be a stiffer penalty. It can't be a slap on the wrist. It has to hurt, right? And that's the de-incentivizer. Long story short, too long, didn't listen to everything. My stance on PEDs, I don't like them. I think they shouldn't be allowed. There's 4 big reasons. 1, potential harm, short-term and long-term, to the athlete themselves. 2, potential harm to their opponent by the enhanced capabilities that they've earned, which they may maim, like in Michael Bisping losing his eye, for example, to Vitor. That was in TRT to Vitor. Or you could even kill somebody, right? So no good. 3, we're adding an additional gatekeeper now, which is, it's not just about how hard you train or the techniques you're training, the strategies, the coaches you're with. It's also now about your pharmacists. It's about your doctors, the connections you have, the monetary resources to pay for all this. Makes it prohibitive now for more athletes to be able to get to that top level. And then 4, finally, the rules say you can't do it. The rules say you can't do it, you can't do it. Just like I can't eye gouge, I shouldn't be able to cheat. Don't let them do it. On the leagues, a clean league and an enhanced league, I think it's fine, but that only exists in a theoretical realm. We've had enhanced leagues, which was Pride FC, and pretty much a lot of fighting in Asia and Japan. They don't really regulate it as much as in the US, it seems. So we've seen how that looks. It is entertaining, right? But the pure clean leagues are always going to be, in my opinion, the better leagues, because this is more, there's no asterisk by your name if you are actually clean, right? Like you got here by your own gumption, your own talents, your own abilities. You didn't have any unfair advantages that nobody else had. You had to work for it the hard way, and in my opinion, the right way. Anyhow, hopefully you guys enjoyed that breakdown of my take of PEDs. If you have any comments or suggestions, feel free to chime in the comments. Otherwise, I'll see you all next week.